Here is a video that is new to this channel where I review every episode of a classic Cartoon Network show. This video will be ranking every episode of the original Powerpuff Girls show. The movie, pilots prior to the series, and the reboot will not be included in this video. Special thanks goes to Ellis Smart for the inspiration, as this was inspired by his video where he ranked every SpongeBob SquarePants episode ever. Episodes of this show from each season will be ranked from best to worst after each season is reviewed. With that being said, here we go. Starting from the very first episode of the series. People could argue that the first episode of the Powerpuff Girls that aired on TV was Insect Inside. However, that was actually episode 3, which aired a week later. These episodes were featured first on the complete series DVD box set, but they are not the first episodes according to this archive of featured episodes from the Cartoon Network website back in 2000. Anyways, this episode starts the original series with the introduction of Mojo Jojo, who steals an Anubis stock head from the museum, as well as the jewels at night while people are sleeping. This leads to an investigation from the girls around the museum, which later becomes obvious that a glass case was broken to steal a jewel. When the girls rescue a dog from a hard car, they realize everyone turned into dogs when the mayor and his assistants start becoming dogs. Mojo Jojo uses the powers from the dog head to turn everyone in town and the world, including the narrator, into dogs. At this point, Mojo Jojo feels unstoppable at this point and would make the human dogs obey him, including the Powerpuff Girls later being turned to dogs when they confront Mojo Jojo after he steals all the jewels. However, the powers never go away completely as the Powerpuff Girls find a plan to outsmart Mojo Jojo despite being dogs when Buttercup gets Mojo Jojo from the other side, making him break the head, and Mojo Jojo gets turned into a dog. This episode is going on the top of the list. Before we go over and rank this episode, I would like to say that the title of this episode is a play on Mommy Dearest. We start off with the Powerpuff Girls being taken straight into bed, and after that happens, the professor feels lonely because he is not in a relationship. This is when he is at a grocery store, where the Powerpuff Girls bombard him with what cereal they want, and falls in love with someone he runs into while shopping. She introduces herself as I'm a good lady, and the girls set up a date with the professor. They help dress up the professor for the occasion, but you gotta wonder what Buttercup was putting into his pocket. All of the others make sense. The professor comes back with his date after the mayor babysits the girls. This is when she makes the girls clean everything themselves, with no powers after cleaning up the house with their powers. I'm a good lady becomes more strict with the girls and makes them not do what they like. When they come back home after fighting crime, Ima grounds them for what she thought was them sneaking out, and even the professor agrees with her without knowing what really happened. The girls figure out she is really seductive, knowing she stole jewels from the mayor. Luckily, the professor finds out what really happened and doesn't believe her lies, and she goes to jail at the end, believing the girls over-seduce her. The episode ends with someone coming over to the professor's house with a pie, so the love story doesn't end after all. So far, this episode is going on the bottom of the list. In this episode, Bubbles has a fear of roaches and she tries to run away while Buttercup tries to kill the roach. This ends when the professor catches the roach and gives a history lesson on the roach and why it is useless to kill roaches despite all the times that roaches have been killed. This is where we get introduced to the villain in this episode, known as Roach Coach, who lives in a rundown apartment and has an army of roaches by his side. Roach Coach has a huge hatred for the human race and uses the Powerpuff Girls' hatred for roaches as a chance to take a shot against them. The next day, roaches take over the town and infect everyone. When the girls get called, Bubbles doesn't take the whole thing seriously and hangs up on them a few times before Blossom takes the call and goes downtown. Buttercup wants to kill them, but Blossom has the idea to put all the cockroaches in a giant jar. This is where the Roach Coach uses the whistle to free the roaches and becomes one with the roaches until the girls decide to destroy the entire giant roach because of what it is on the inside. Turns out the Roach Coach happens to be a roach inside a human body. This episode is ranked above Mommy Dearest. We are introduced to 3 criminals who try to rob a bank and a jewelry store, but they get foiled by the girls both times, until they take the mayor and Miss Bellum hostage, which also ends up failing too as things end flawlessly. While in jail, the criminals hatch up an idea of wanting to be like the Powerpuff Girls, and they end up finding costumes with them conveniently being placed in their cell. Despite being tall men, they end up fooling the prison guard into being the Powerpuff Girls through their costumes. Everyone seems to be stupid enough to believe they are the Powerpuff Girls and successfully rob a bank and rob the jewelry store despite being grown men. It's surprising when even the mayor himself is fooled into thinking they are the girls. The only person who isn't fooled is Miss Bellum, who is the mayor's assistant, but the mayor falsely gets the real Powerpuff Girls arrested. This leads to a fight sequence between the imposters and the original trio at a Chinese food restaurant, and a real blowout happens, which leads to the three criminals being in jail for good. However, since the Powerpuff Girls escaped from prison after being told who the people are, the girls have to serve out the rest of their sentence despite being in there for no reason over a mistake. This episode is not that great and is a poor attempt at being funny, with the only good thing being the fight sequence other than a Dexter's Laboratory cameo in the episode. The episode is being ranked under Mommy Dearest, right at the bottom of the list. Bubbles' doll plays a major role in this episode. This is also where we get introduced to the devil of the series, known as him. He has an echo-like voice, knowing the fact that he is a demon.
You didn't destroy them at all, did you? How could you let the Powerpuff Girls humiliate you so completely?
Bubbles gets upset when Blossom and Buttercup fight, so him gets an idea to give a voice to Bubbles' doll, Octi. He takes advantage of Bubbles by giving Octi the power to manipulate Bubbles. It's really freaky how he gets the power to make the toy feel like a real imaginary friend to Bubbles by her ideas for her sisters. This doesn't change the fact that Blossom and Buttercup still fight with each other, so Octi reveals himself to be him the whole time and turns Octi into a monster destroying the town. When Bubbles gets trapped after trying to reason, this brings Blossom and Buttercup to work together without fighting each other on what they should do. He gets defeated, and the Powerpuff Girls learn that teamwork is the most important. This episode is the first time they try something special by having an original plot with Bubbles' toy octopus Octi. The ranking for this episode is now second on the list, close to the top, right under the first episode. This episode introduces the Amoeba Boys to the series for the first time since the What a Cartoon short Crime 101, making this the first ever appearance overall in the series. Of course, the Amoeba Boys are pathetic excuses for criminals since their idea of crime is literally when they try to convince the girls that they are villains. So they have an idea to stay on the grass near a sign that says keep off the grass. After staying there all night in the rain, they get sick and later spread their sickness to other people. The girls try to save the people who were infected when Buttercup scares the Amoeba Boys away, and then the girls and the rest of the characters get sick. The professor tells the girls to find the Amoeba Boys as them being the cause is the route to find a cure. They eventually meet up and fight together, but very slowly because they are sick. As the Amoeba Boys are put in the quarantine, the professor uses them as an antidote, and everyone is cured of the sickness. Not the best episode, but not the worst so far this season. Going above Mommy Dearest. Here we have the first appearance of the Gang Green Gang in this series. They are mainly gangsters who like to mess with people because they can. When the Gang Green Gang runs into the Powerpuff Girls, they pretend to act all innocent, and that's where Buttercup has a crush on the gang leader Ace. She makes the girls forgive them the first time, but for some reason the next time at the museum, Buttercup feels sorry for them because of her affection, which leads to her sneaking out of the house to meet them at their hideout. This gives us a side of Buttercup we never knew about her, as she decides to have fun with a bunch of gangsters, which is different from her character. Ace tries to convince the other gang members that Buttercup is not their friend, and because she is a powerful girl, they want to use her to take control of the town. The gang decides to prank call the girls and trick them into thinking Buttercup is in trouble until Buttercup tears down the wall in accident, figuring out that her sisters are in trouble. This leads to the gangsters being beaten up and a nosebleed Ace. Buttercup then learns that the gangster life is not that great after all. This is another great and well thought episode with trying new plots. Going at the top of the list. Fuzzy Lumpkins makes his first appearance in the series after the What a Cartoon short Meet Fuzzy Lumpkins. He is a redneck who lives out in the country, secluded and away from everyone, and would shoot anything that gets onto his property. Fuzzy Lumpkins tries to take a nap when a squirrel gets onto his property and chases the squirrel into town. This is when he gets hit by a truck and goes insane at anyone he comes into contact with, destroying property in the long run. A rampage is already caused once the Powerpuff Girls goes downtown, and people can't describe who or what Fuzzy Lumpkins is. Bubbles then encounters a squirrel and reveals that she can talk to squirrels as the squirrel lets her know who Fuzzy Lumpkins is. When the girls confront Fuzzy, he gets mad about them on their property, which is where the squirrel and the girls take away the banjo. Buttercup then destroys the banjo by smashing it on him, and Fuzzy goes to jail for his rampage where his banjo is taken away in the end. This episode is going under Cashier Fight. Nighttime falls in Townsville, and the girls argue about going to bed until Buttercup scares Bubbles with her tale of the boogeyman. After the professor gives them a talk after checking up on them, they go to bed. A transition underneath the Powerpuff Girls' bed shows a glimpse of the boogeyman's nightclub where he hatches a plan to cut off all the power, later sending the monsters out, and would later end the plan by setting a disco ball to eclipse the morning sun. The racket from the party happening in town would wake the Powerpuff Girls up, and they would head to the party where they would face off against the monsters, leading to a meetup with the Boogeyman, and they would head to space where we have a Star Wars inspired scene for the falling action where the Boogeyman would be taken out, as well as the ball causing the sun to shine and all the nocturnal monsters going away. The episode is very unique for a terror-like episode while also paying tribute to Star Wars. Going above OCTA Evil. The Powerpuff Girls and the mayor pay a visit to the old Magic Theater, where he tells the story of his experiences watching magic shows at the theater as a little kid before tearing the old theater down. While tearing the theater down, a zombie of the old magician emerges from the casket he died in. The girls watch a horror movie where Bubbles gets scared of zombies, which is where we continue with the dead magician playing magic tricks on the entire town. We go back to the girls watching a horror movie where they get a call into action on what is happening in the town. The girls are scared to go at first, but they reluctantly have to anyway. The girls try to convince him to stop what he is doing when the zombie remembers the girl he got onto stage because Blossom managed to look like her, in the process hypnotizing Blossom. They would get magic tricks performed on them by the dead magician by putting Blossom into the same trick as the girl he thought was the same person as her. Turns out the zombie was actually Blossom, and she manages to reverse the magic tricks. So far, this is the most eerie episode of the series and the second terror-related episode, going under Monkey See, Doggy Do. The Gang Green Gang make their second appearance in this episode. In this episode, they do prank phone calls, but not to alert anyone or call for help like the last Gang Green Gang episode, Buttercrush. They prank call random numbers, beginning the episode with the narrator being pranked.
Excuse me. Hello?
Yeah, listen, jerkface, you good-for-nothing toad.
You can't talk to me like that.
How about this? I think you stink. I can smell you over the phone.
Why, I oughta. Who is this?
One of the numbers they prank call is the professor, where one of them tells him he won $10 million and he falls for it. After doing their calls, they prank call the mayor's office, where one of the gangsters pretends to be the mayor's secretary, Miss Bellum, and the mayor falls for it, and they take over the office. While the Gang Green Gang are in the mayor's office, they prank call the Powerpuff Girls with the hotline on several occasions by tricking them into thinking the other villains are doing bad things. This leads to the villains being pissed off, and rightfully so, calling each other to discuss what has happened to them, and then they call the mayor's office where Big Billy of the Gang Green Gang reveals they have been prank calling them, leading to the gangsters getting a beating from the villains, and the girls not knowing it is the actual mayor calling them, and the professor manages to still say on the phone, not knowing he was prank called. This is also the first time the girls aren't credited for saving the day at the end. This episode is going above Cashier Fight. A montage of the Powerpuff Girls showing the great things they do for Townsville begins the episode. This angered the villain him as he hatches a plan to try and trick the Powerpuff Girls by making everyone and everything rude. You gotta love that Simpsons reference in the show when Bubbles gets a paper ball thrown at her. Even the mayor and the narrator are affected by the curse, including the professor. The villain reveals he is the one behind this as he eerily licks the professor's head like a popsicle, and he gets the entire town to turn against the girls, which causes them to fight back against their own people. The girls would have to explain to them why they put their own people in the hospital, and all is forgiven. This episode is decent at best, but not the best episode with him in the series, going under fuzzy logic. Townsville is on fire and a cold breeze saves the town. This is where we get introduced to a new hero, Major Man. He gets all the spotlight over the Powerpuff Girls, with his superpowers being more stronger than the girls themselves. The girls get a call from the mayor, relieving the girls from their duties and having the town embracing Major Man as a new superhero. This is sad for the girls because they were special and looked up to. Turns out Major Man happens to be someone who creates problems to fix them, not being a real hero. Turns out when a monster attacks Townsville, Major Man can't fight back, which means he is a fraud and not a real hero. Major Man even admits that he faked everything to the disappointment of the town and giving his duties back to the girls, which he didn't earn in the first place. Major Man is freed, and he leaves the town, making the girls the heroes of the town once again, and the monster happens to be sent by the girls to prove a point about Major Man.
Coast is clear, Fred. Sorry we had to rough you up so much.
That's okay. I was good, wasn't I? Wasn't I?
You were perfect. No one suspected we set the whole thing up. Thanks.
Oh, anytime, girls. Oh, but next time, girls, not so rough.
The episode just proves what would happen if a different superhero was in the Powerpuff Girls' place, going above Mommy Dearest. The professor ends up in an accident in the lab, which leads the girls to find the letter there from Mojo Jojo.
Dear Powerpuff Girls, I have kidnapped Professor Utonium. I have taken him someplace against his will. If you look for him in the spots he likes to be, you will not find him. He's with me, but not by choice. I took him, and he didn't like it. This message is from and was written by Mojo Jojo.
When the girls find Mojo Jojo keeping the professor hostage, he tells his origin story of how he came to be once the girls were born. The professor feels sorry for Mojo Jojo, which leads him to request for superpowers like the girls. So Mojo Jojo and Professor Utonium work together to build a machine that copies the girls' powers and transfers them to Mojo Jojo so he gets the powers for the first and possibly the only time. So then he uses them to fight against the Powerpuff Girls. Knowing Mojo Jojo has powers, he destroys all the explosives, which gives Professor Utonium flashbacks of what Mojo Jojo did when he was a lab assistant. This reveals that Mojo Jojo accidentally created the girls, which makes everything Mojo Jojo does from before and after worthless, meaning he is worthless as a villain in the series. But at least he is still a good villain, because in this episode, the day is saved by him. Going under Monkey See, Doggy Do. This episode is set at the school that the Powerpuff Girls go to, which happens to be a kindergarten. Elmer's notorious for eating paste, which people make fun of him for. He even eats paste during recess, and a diseased fly contaminates the paste, which gives him paste superpowers where he is a paste monster, in which all of this could have been prevented if Buttercup apologized to Elmer, which she does at the end of the episode. I may like Buttercup as a character, but it was very rude of her for what she did in the episode, and I feel sorry for Elmer because he was never taught better and knew better for his age. But I can understand that about him because he is a little kid, and kids do stupid things sometimes for the sake of being kids. Too bad Elmer never went back to his normal self, going above major competition. A heat wave takes over the entire city of Townsville, and this is where we get introduced to Blossom's new superpower after Buttercup makes hot oatmeal. What makes it special is that only Blossom can do that.
So what are you gonna do with it? I know! Make the floor all ice like in Tom and Jerry. That's my favorite.
Bubbles points out a reference to Tom and Jerry and suggests making the floor ice cold with her breath, which she does. Professor Utonium tells Blossom to only use ice breath if she needs to. However, the ice breath power really is needed in this scenario because of the heat wave, and she wants to try and keep the promise, but she makes an exception with several people that are suffering and turns the whole playground into a winter wonderland. The heat is so hot that the robber's getaway car gets its tires frozen, and Blossom's ice breath makes them go away. Blossom vows to never use her ice breath again until this happens. A meteor comes to the town, and Blossom is convinced to use her ice breath on the meteor, which she does, and this ends the heat wave, and she loses her ice breath for now. This is a good episode because it introduces how special certain powers are for them, going above Buttercrush, right at the top of the list. Bubbles is not seen in the same limelight as her sisters in training because of how cute and innocent her family members see her as. She sneaks out and trains herself on the higher levels to prove how tough she really is. Bubbles uses her powers to her advantage by catching up to get Blossom on Duck Duck Goose and even takes a dog out of a car and beats the dog up for causing a traffic jam. Bubbles thinks she can handle everything herself, causing her to terrorize people for breaking minor offenses until she gets captured by Mojo Jojo. When Bubbles calls Mojo Jojo names and Mojo Jojo makes the race stronger, she frees herself and beats him up. This makes her sisters accept her for who she is, and Mojo Jojo gets beaten up again for fighting back. This episode is one of the best episodes of Season 1 because it shows us a side of Bubbles in an amazing way, and Bubbles is not even my favorite of the three Powerpuff Girls. Going under Monkey See, Doggy Do. We get to see Townsville from the mayor's point of view in his office. This is basically a day in the life of the mayor and what he does in his job. A lot of things happen, such as him looking at a law design when Mojo Jojo knocks the mayor out cold and he gets kidnapped and can't see anything. Mojo Jojo explains his plans to take over Townsville, and the Powerpuff Girls foil his plan and take the mayor back to his office. The Powerpuff Girls tried to explain their sides of the story to the mayor since he couldn't see what had happened, but couldn't agree on who told the story with the most truth while also arguing about what happened. However, they couldn't explain to him what was funny, but we found out why at the end of the episode. He happens to be naked, meaning Mojo Jojo took off his clothes. Very interesting episode, especially seeing things from the mayor's point of view, since in past episodes, there weren't a lot of episodes outside the Powerpuff Girls' point of view, which happened most often other than a couple of villains, going above fuzzy logic. The Powerpuff Girls stop the owner of a cat from destroying the city, with Bubbles taking the cat with them. So they ask the professor if they can keep the cat, which the professor lets them, and after a night decides to have the cat at the house, even though he wasn't allowed to have a pet as a kid. Just like the previous owner, the cat hypnotizes Professor Newtonium into obeying every command by building a ray gun just like the one at the beginning. The cat also makes the professor commit crimes as an accomplice until the very end, where he jumps off a building to try and get the cat, only to be saved by the girls. This episode makes cats more evil than the dogs in the show. It makes cats look bad. While this episode is not the worst overall, going under major competition. Fuzzy Lumpkins runs for mayor in Townsville, and he manages to win against the current mayor of the town and series in this episode. This leaves the former mayor to be kicked out and going homeless without a job. When Fuzzy becomes mayor, he makes a lot of changes, such as making the secretary a country girl and calling the girls to help fix his problems, such as chasing a pig and doing child labor like milking and washing his clothes. I feel sorry for the girls because they're not doing what they're supposed to do. So they call the mayor's secretary to spell him when Fuzzy is sleeping, in a plan to get the old mayor back. When the old mayor confronts Fuzzy, he challenges the old mayor to a wrestling match, where at first he doesn't do too good in the fight to get his old job back against the 4 Lumpkin family members, until Fuzzy starts wearing the hat, and this is where the old mayor ends up victorious with a body slam, ending Fuzzy Lumpkin's short term as mayor and giving the old mayor his job back, and things still stay the same for now. This episode proves that people shouldn't be voting like sheep and have to always research who they vote for, going above the bare facts. Mojo Jojo wakes up and decides to get breakfast, but he only has one egg in the fridge. So he goes out to the store to get more eggs since he wants to have 2 eggs for breakfast. But while going to the store, he has to make a trip back since he forgot to get his wallet. And when he goes out the second time, it's crowded in town. So he finally gets to the store and gets his eggs needed for breakfast and sees a headline in the paper of the Powerpuff Girls saving the day. After that, he realizes that their ball ended up in the house while they were playing catch. Mojo Jojo invites the girls in, and while they are at his house, he hides the ball and uses this opportunity to use his weapons on them, specifically his ray. However, he wants the girls to stay still and not move, which fails miserably as they mess around his house and even look at his photo album. At one point, the girls even play hide and seek. So the girls decide to help Mojo Jojo find their ball, which is way different from his main plan, and then his plan fails when the ray zaps him in front of the girls, and he gives the Powerpuff Girls his ball back. Mojo Jojo would then read a headline of him returning the ball to the girls, and he saves the day once again. This episode is a good description of a day in the life of one of the most notorious villains in the series, and deserves a good spot on this list, going above Telephonies. My opinion on this episode might be controversial for most people. Rainbow the Clown is performing at a kid's birthday party when he gets into the street and turns black and white from a bleached truck and becomes the opposite of what he originally was. He then turns the whole town black and white. How no one was able to stop this and let this continue is beyond me. This is where he gets the girls on a school bus where they prevent an accident and find out about the whole town being black and white, and Bubbles goes on a coloring frenzy trying to color everything back and taking every non-black and white thing out. Is it just me, or has Bubbles gone on a rampage all of a sudden? What she is doing is no better than what the clown or mime is doing, and to think even the police are useless against his powers. I guess shooting wouldn't make sense for a show like the Powerpuff Girls. Even Buttercup and Blossom are victims of the curse, and now that everyone's affected, this leads Bubbles to make a song and have a Powerpuff band this episode to bring all the colors back to the town. This is the only good part of the episode, which was this song, but it leads to a bad ending where we have injustice for the clown as nothing ends up fair for him. This episode is going on the bottom of the list now, but it's not the worst episode of this season. We just have 2 episodes left of this season. Mojo Jojo tries to take over Townsville with his machines, but fails every time and always ends up back in prison, leading to Mojo coming up with an idea for his antagonist superheroes to the Powerpuff Girls out of armpit hairs, snails, and a puppy dog tail, including toilet water for Chemical X while in prison. They call themselves the Rowdyruff Boys, Brick, Boomer, and Butch, and they break Mojo Jojo as well as themselves out of prison, which is where they catch up with the Powerpuff Girls. The Powerpuff Girls fight off a giant octopus, where the Rowdyruff Boys start attacking the girls themselves and the fight happens. The boys try out their special moves against the girls and they do the same. This is an epic fight because it shows the girls are not afraid of anyone or anything, especially at their own size. Of course, just like other episodes, a lot of damage is done around the town. However, the girls end up losing to the boys after doing a lot of work to save people and the whole town is disappointed. The girls think they have lost for good when Miss Bellum gives them advice on what little boys' weaknesses are and what they are afraid of. The way that the boys get defeated is by kisses from each of the girls, and they surprisingly have that as a weakness and explode as a result when Mojo Jojo goes back to jail again. This is a great episode and a great introduction to the best villains in the series. Hell, I am even called Brick for crying out loud, as I have named myself and dressed myself after Brick from the Rowdyruff Boys. This episode is close to the top of the list, going under Eyesore. Would have been on the top if it weren't for the ending, but there will only be a few years or 4 seasons until the boys come back. The next and final episode of Season 1, which is Uh-Oh Dynamo, will be reviewed and will determine the ranking by my friend Casey, so I'll have him take it away.
Look, first off, when the Powerpuff Girls try to take on that Blowfish, it was no problem for them, but it was a big problem for the professor somehow. Somehow, he had the audacity to create himself a giant-ass robot to fight off against the same monsters that the Powerpuff Girls can fight off with ease, but Professor Utonium instead just manipulated them into using it's for their own safety. And when they use it to fight that giant Blowfish, it destroyed nearly the entire city, probably killing millions of other people in the process. And yet it was all the professor's intention to keep the girls safe. That is no excuse.
So would you say this episode is ranked on the bottom of the list?
Precisely.
Well, that's about it. Now you're going to see the entire ranking of Season 1.